Greetings, mortals, peers, and queers, to another debate on Serotonin Studios. I am your host, and I am debating with one of my community members, which you can join in the Discord, where all of my debates are hosted and where I talk with community members while off camera. So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a couple of different topics. The first one is going to be on the difference between science and pseudoscience. So, I'll turn it over to my guest to open up with the questioning. Do you think that there is a difference between science and pseudoscience?
No,
Why is that?
I don't believe there is a distinction between the two. I don't think anything garners a distinction. I think that there's obviously a classification difference that we have. Like, I'm not saying that the terms don't exist, and I'm not saying that, like, things can't be put in those categories based off of the terms that we make, but I don't believe that there's any real grounds to separate science and pseudoscience that makes one more legitimate than another.
I would argue that the difference between science and pseudoscience is quite monumental. Science is the process of objectively establishing facts through testing and experimentation, whereas pseudoscience is the proposition or finding of a system of explanation which is presented as science but lacks the rigor essential to the scientific method. And I think that's important. The rigor and the self-correction mechanisms that science has separates it from pseudoscience. Rather famously, science is the observation, research, hypothesis, test, analysis, and report. It's a self-correcting system of establishing facts, whereas pseudoscience is guesses pretending to be science. Does that make
No,
sense?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, I mean, like, by definition, pseudoscience can include steps of the scientific method without all of them. So, for example, it doesn't need to be, let's say, reviewed, right? Like, or maybe it doesn't need to be observable. Like, you can technically define these things as pseudoscience, but even more than that, I don't think that science being this, renewable thing that corrects itself is unique to what you refer to as science. Like, if an individual wishes to, I don't know, discover something, like let's like use alchemy for example, would like to make a potion that does something, like grow an inch, right? Like, it is, I mean, it's kind of obvious that the process of alchemy can, well, okay, let's put it like this. An individual can tell for sure whether or not they grow an inch. So it's not necessarily that science is this self-correcting thing. Trial and error is an aspect of every single method almost of coming to conclusions of what we call science other than the scientific method. And so I don't really think it's just science that can eliminate bad conclusions. If I say that a potion or an alchemy of some sort could create or make me grow an inch, and it doesn't do so, well, then it is a method that can eliminate that. It doesn't really require that science be this, methodic kind of system that worked. I don't see why that would have to be true. You might say it's more effective, but I would say effective in doing what? It's necessarily proving its own conclusions. Like, I don't believe that
Objectively
makes it
establishing
science.
facts.
Well, what does it mean to be a fact? Because it's established by science, or because we've come to the conclusion of it? Like a fact is a fact, regardless of the method at which you come to conclusion of it. Like if something is objectively true, then it doesn't matter what method. Like, certain methods might be able to find this truth more easily, or there might be only certain truths that can come about through certain methods. Like, alchemy cannot come to the same conclusions as, like let's say, the microscopic sciences, right? Like there might be objective truths that are outside of the scope of certain sciences, but that doesn't mean that the method is what allowed it to be a truth.
No,
So
but
why?
alchemy is, I think, a really good example there. Alchemy got phased out into chemistry because chemistry was more broad and yet more specific. Alchemy talked about if you drink mercury, you'll live 100 years longer. Whereas chemistry is all about the atomic structure of substances in the world. You know,
I don't think that was very parallel. I don't think slandering alchemy did anything there. Like the
slandering
idea that
alchemy.
the idea that the transition to chemistry has allowed us to never come to ridiculous conclusions is kind of absurd. I mean, the transition from alchemy to chemistry happened over 100 years ago, generally speaking, and yet we had time periods where people and doctors would say that cigarettes are healthy. So I don't necessarily think that that alchemy is exclusively wrong. It can only exclusively in chemistry never exclusively comes to wrong conclusions. There's thousands of medicines that are taken down by the FDA every single year, right? That are produced by people that you would describe as being chemists. And the idea that we've developed an absolute idea of the human body and its physiology and how it relates to chemicals that we might manufacture in a medical sense, I think is absurd. So I don't really think it's a fault of alchemy that people come to conclusions that aren't necessarily true.
Okay,
Because
this is a great
obviously
point
people who
because because there was a time where we didn't know of the dangers of smoking, but because science is a constantly self-updating, constantly self-correcting mechanism, we eventually learn of the harms of smoking, and
that's not what it was.
we made a push to stop it.
That's
Uh,
not what it was. Any alchemist could come to the same conclusion. An individual was told that drinking a gallon of chlorine, what would be considered chlorine, let's say 400 years ago, whatever chemical you want to use, drink mercury, and they die instantly. I don't think that alchemy is incapable of coming to the conclusion that that wasn't true. The only difference between alchemy and what you call science is what you think the method is of coming to conclusions. It's not necessarily the process. Because alchemy is a science by definition. I mean, it is a science in an old sense where it is a
it
or
is
well let's put it
it
like
is
this,
an
science in
early
a general sense.
infantile science. It is
Well,
the
no, it is
beginnings.
not. It's not. I disagree. No, I would just say like how we define science is important. So how we define science, generally speaking, is methods in which we come to conclusions, like the methods in which we draw and come to conclusions. So alchemy is a science. Like you can come to that conclusion. The only reason it's considered a pseudoscience now is because we have decided that there is a distinction between the sciences, which isn't
Because it
because
led
one
us
can
to
come to
many
a
false conclusions that were later proven false by
that's
science.
not fault. There is an infinite number of false conclusions you can derive from the scientific method. Like it is not exclusive to alchemy that we come to false
And the
conclusions.
thing
Like
that makes
this is
the
absurd.
scientific method unique is that it self corrects.
How is it unique if anyone who commits alchemy can also look at a person who dies and it's directly against the claim? If I claim that an individual will live forever if they drink a mixture of alchemy and they die instantly, that does not require that I, let's say, observe and then peer review that. Like they can come to that conclusion. It's the reason why alchemists, like for example, there was a standard of alchemy. Like alchemy wasn't this like anarchist like science system where people would just say whatever works, right? Like there was actually a methodic system in which people made potions and shit. So they weren't just there wasn't very much like there is alchemy that obviously that contradicted one another. Like there'd be alchemists who said, well, actually, if you mix this potion, you get this result. But like you didn't have like people just randomly claiming things because it was kind of evident that maybe eating coal wasn't good, right? That is a conclusive thing. Like no alchemist is advocating for this. Like, and that's obviously an example. That's not a concrete thing. I'm not sure if people recommend eating coal. Maybe they do, but I'm just saying specifically, like alchemy is just a method in which we can come to conclusions.
Yeah,
The
alchemy
conclusion that
is an ancient branch of natural philosophy. It's a proto scientific tradition that was historically practiced in like China and India, the Muslim world, and Europe. But
well, that means it's like that was like everywhere. But yeah,
it eventually got phased out into chemistry because chemistry was more accurate, more reliable, and explained more of the phenomenon we observed.
well,
It's
it might be it might be
you're looking at a baby and you're going, well, that baby could also do things. Yes, but that's not anything compared to the full-fledged and refined might of the modern scientific method.
No, the scientific method doesn't have any power to it. You have to understand that it's not a method for it is simply a method for coming to conclusions. It doesn't necessarily change the truths that it finds. So it's not more powerful in finding truths. Like those truths are evident in multiple ways. It just finds them. So I'm what my claim is simply this: alchemy is just as legitimate as the method of science that you call the scientific method, right? There are distinguishable differences, right, between the two, but I don't believe that has any effect on how we come to knowledge. Like, I don't think that we should disclude alchemy as a legitimate way to find knowledge.
Well,
Like,
we can
I'm
find
advocating,
huge.
I'm advocating that the kind of absolute system of science that you describe as a scientific method, which really isn't what science is, but
That really is what science is.
say again.
Science is the scientific method. They are
No, it
synonymous
is
and
not.
one.
That is not what the science. That's not what science is.
Are
The
you one of the people who
scientific.
thinks science is some sort of religion?
No, science is not the scientific method. The word science predates the word scientific method by a millennia. The difference between the two is simply this: the science used to mean knowledge. Like that is the origin of the word science. Science means knowledge. And
Yeah.
then we
Science is the
transitioned.
pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world, following systemic
No, no, no.
methodology based on evidence.
Okay. No, that is not what science used to mean. Science originally meant knowledge. That was what we meant science. And then we then separated the terms science and knowledge. So science has now become what we describe the method of acquiring knowledge. So when I say science, like if you were to say this in an old way, science, the scientific method, is the means at which we acquire science. Those are not synonymous things. So, but even if we don't use old speak, even if we don't use the old definitions of the word science as being knowledge and scientific method being the method at which we attain science, science is just the process or the method at which we obtain knowledge. That method is currently what we consider the scientific method, but obviously it's a little bit complicated to understand because we happen to use the word science in the name of the method that we use to acquire knowledge. So the method at which we obtain knowledge is referred to as science. The current method that we're using is called the scientific method. So we have to separate that. I am saying that the separation between science and pseudoscience is a false one. I don't believe there's any distinction between the two. I think any method, generally speaking, can come to knowledge, right? Like you are able to come to conclusions.
Wait, we
that
can
are
find
true.
a vast difference in effectiveness between science and pseudoscience.
That
Which would
doesn't-
you?
that-
whose
that- that
life would you
doesn't-
place your hands in? A prayer healer or an open heart surgeon? Who's
That doesn't. Yeah, that's
who-
fine. That doesn't illegitimate. Pause. There are separate claims here. The first one is that one being more effective doesn't make the other illegitimate.
It
right?
kind of does when we're talking about finding the pursuit of knowledge and finding and establishing objective facts. Whichever one is the most objective and most reliable and most accurate takes the cake.
No. Wait, that's not necessarily true. It's about coming to. It's about the method of coming to objectivity. It's about finding truth. It's not necessarily which one does so faster,
No,
or which one
better,
does
more
so
accurate.
with more. Well, what does it mean to be more accurate in science? Like, why do you say
What?
that one system is more accurate than the other? That isn't
Because it
necessarily
more
true.
reliably comes to conclusions that can be repeated and tested.
Why is that true? Wait, how is this true? Like, for example, if I say,
Like, we
I'm gonna
measure
give a
gravity
I'm
and
gonna
we-
give you, no. I'm gonna give you an example. If I say drinking a gallon of this liquid will kill you, an alchemist tests this, and someone like you, in the scientific method sense, was to test this, and both of them use this test. A person drinks this gallon of liquid, and they die. How did one of them come to a better conclusion? How does that make any sense? Is it because you require drinking it twice? Well, the alchemist can do so too. It's not. Alchemy doesn't mean that they can't possibly do things twice, so or three times, whatever number you think is specific enough to justify something. Like there is a reason, like I said before, that alchemists didn't just recommend random thing. Like there was actually a standard amount of alchemy. Like there was a standard to alchemy that was legitimately true, right? And it's not because people were making it up. It's because alchemists were able to test things way before the concept of the scientific method as being true. So alchemy came to objective conclusions. They came to facts of reality without requiring the scientific method. And so what I'm asking is if an individual makes a claim like drinking this will kill you, and an alchemist does this and you do this, they both come to the same conclusion, maybe through a slightly different method, but they both come to the same conclusion. So how could you possibly say that one is more effective than the other?
One comes to more accurate and more reliable conclusions.
Oh, wait, what is there? Is the person dead?
Yes.
Like,
but we can...
okay, fantastic. So what more accurate can you get? I'm saying if an alchemist claims that drinking this will kill you,
pseudoscience. Let me break this down. Pseudoscience tells us that the Earth is flat. Science tells us that it's an oblate spheroid and that those people are morons.
That is not. No, that is.
Yeah, it is.
Pseudo. Let's just deconstruct what you're saying. No, none of that was true, and that was blatantly a pivot. But I'm going to humor this because it was blatantly wrong as well. Pseudoscience is a term that is basically used to separate the current method of acquiring knowledge from ones that people deem to be illegitimate. So what you are saying is illegitimate science comes to this conclusion.
Comes to wrong conclusions.
That is not necessarily true. No, that is not necessarily.
I'm sorry, do you think the Earth is flat?
That is not what I'm saying.
Okay, pseudosciences say that the Earth is flat. Pseudoscience says that
No. You're blatantly wrong. That is not, like, you are combining things in your sentence that don't make any sense.
Pseudoscience is the proposition, a finding, or a system of explanation that is presented as science, but lacks the rigor essential to the scientific method.
Yes. Okay, so pseudoscience makes no claims. Pseudoscience is just a method that is deemed illegitimate to coming to knowledge. So when you say...
No, it's wrong. That's the thing.
Allow me to finish. When you say pseudoscience believes this, that doesn't make any sense. Because if you were to translate what you're saying, like if we were to break down your sentence, all you are saying is, this illegitimate method makes this claim. How could that possibly be true? The methods aren't making the claim. Like, that is like saying science comes to the conclusion that the Earth is round. No. Science doesn't come to that conclusion. We have used science to come to that conclusion.
To observe reality.
People use pseudoscience to justify their conclusion that the Earth is flat. That is a lot different than the statement, pseudoscience claims the Earth is flat. That is not true. It is people pseudoscientists
claiming that the Earth is flat is a piece of pseudoscience. It's not real science.
No, pseudoscientists can come to correct conclusions. This doesn't make any sense. All that pseudoscience is deemed as an illegitimate method of coming to conclusions.
This is why in school they always ask you to show your work when you're doing math problems, because even if you get the right answer, via the wrong method, then you're not going to be able to reliably repeat that process to consistently get the right answer.
That doesn't mean you didn't come to the right answer. So I'm going to explain again.
You can guessing can sometimes get to the right answer. Randomly throwing numbers at a wall can sometimes get you to the right answer.
Correct.
That doesn't mean it is a useful or reliable method to acquiring the correct answer.
Pause. You are saying too many things with too many different conclusions.
I'm sorry, my words are too big for you. Try and keep up.
That's not... Okay, that's not what's happening. I'll respond to that. See, that was impolite, and that wasn't what's happening. You keep switching between their claims are false to their method is unreliable. I am saying that those are mutually exclusive claims. We can both agree that you can come to the wrong conclusion. Sorry, you can come to the right conclusion using a less than reliable method. And that reason that method is less reliable is because maybe coming to other conclusions is more difficult for that method. That's possible. My response is what you're originally saying. I want to first address what you're saying. When you say something, I think we can agree. It's not, you're not conceding the debate or anything if you agree with me, but we have to be very clear on what we're saying. When you say pseudoscience makes a claim, I automatically am going to shut down that question or claim because I don't believe that to be true. Pseudoscience makes no claims. All pseudoscience is what pseudoscience is whatever is defined as an illegitimate way to come to conclusions. That doesn't include the claims that they make. So they can make a claim like this, someone can use the scientific method and make the claim the earth is flat and then prove it wrong. It is not an aspect of pseudoscience to have bad claims. It is not an aspect of science to have good claims. Right?
It is an
Science.
aspect of science to consistently come to correct conclusions.
Wait, no,
That's
no.
the whole
Wait, pause.
fucking
You pause.
point.
Pause. You just purposely strawmanned. I said claims and you said conclusions. Those are not the same. I will repeat myself again. Science, people who use the scientific method can make bad claims, and people who use pseudoscience can make possibly true claims. Their claims could possibly be true. Their conclusion can possibly be truthful, and people who use the scientific method can possibly make claims that are untruthful that don't end up concluding to be correct. All I'm saying is this. When you say pseudoscience makes the claim, automatically what you're saying isn't true, because that is like the equivalent of saying the scientific method makes the claim. If the claim, if you're, unless you're saying the scientific makes the claim that the scientific method is this, saying that scientific method makes the claim the earth is round is patently false, because the scientific method is just something you insert a claim into. It doesn't make any sense to think that the scientific method comes with claims, and it doesn't make any sense to believe that alchemy comes with claims or that pseudoscience comes with claims. So the correct way to actually, and I think we can agree upon this. This isn't a point in my favor or a point in your favor. I'm just simply saying, if you want to be clear about what we're talking about, you are trying to say that pseudoscience is an unreliable way to verify claims, not that pseudoscience makes bad claims. Because claims get verified or get basically tossed in the trash based on these methods. Do you understand?
If you're in a math class and
Yes.
one student is randomly guessing the answer to every single question on the math
Yes.
test, and one student is using the principles of arithmetic to consistently arrive at the correct answers. If I turn to one student and go, "You're using an incorrect method, it will lead you to consistently bad conclusions," even if that student occasionally guessed the right answer to a question, that doesn't mean that they actually solved the question. They don't know how to arrive at the correct answer.
No, I disagree. I disagree with this. This is like the equivalent of saying that people who believe in the kind of paleocentric model, I believe that's the term, but like the Earth-centered model, telling the heliocentric models that they can't come to conclusions. Like it is quite possible, like just like science as you define it, updates all the time, right? Things like arithmetic. I'm just going along with your logical parallel, by the way. Things like arithmetic change all the time. It's quite possible that a person who you think is guessing is using a formula that is not known to arithmetic, or using a formula that has been, let's say, taken out of what is standard arithmetic, and it's capable of reaching conclusions on only specific questions. That is still arithmetic by definition, but it isn't included. This would be quite similar to if alchemists basically could always come to conclusions on certain questions but not others. It's still a legitimate means of science, right?
No.
Well, no, of course. If I said there's a formula I said that just like arithmetic. If I said that there's a formula, every single time you see that there's y1 and y2 in an equation, and they're both on different sides of the equal sign, and there's a specific equation only for those types of equations that helps you solve for what variable x is, and it doesn't apply to any other variable kind of equation ever, right?
If
Like
if
that
you
is still
make a
arithmetic.
pseudoscientific claim, then a scientist can go in with the scientific method and dissect it like a frog in a lab. We can take it apart piece by piece, not only examining the assumptions that make up the claim, but all the little assumptions that are built on top of it.
Well, what about the little assumptions that come along with science? Like any
They
individual
can
can
be proven.
dissect.
That's the point.
There's no assumptions, and the assumptions that science is based around can't be proven. Like
Yeah,
like that
they
is like
fucking can. That's the whole point. Science is
mm,
brick by brick laid upon foundations that are proven and
mm,
tested. And when
no
new science comes along and says,
no
"Hey, we've discovered data
no
that
no
sees the old as
the
faulty," it
problem
self-corrects.
no, the problem with induction has been around for about 1,000 years. It doesn't science. There's things that science can't verify. Like, and that is well, we'll say this. There is things that the scientific method can't verify. Like,
Science can
and there's
tell you all what is, not what ought. Ought is for the philosophers. What is for the scientists.
no, you can't warrant things like perceptual. Like metaphysics aren't something that can be dabbled upon in science, generally speaking.
That's
Like
because
you
metaphysics haven't been proven to exist whatsoever.
what? Okay. Anyways, no,
I'm
so
sorry.
for
I'm
example,
sorry. Do you want to prove God?
that's not God isn't the entirety of metaphysics. What does that even mean? What does that even mean?
Unless metaphysics can be proven to exist, it is not what
Can you
is.
can you define metaphysics for me?
Oh my god. Do I need to Google this for you?
No, you say that, but you don't know what it is because you just thought that metaphysics meant God. So I think you need to actually define it for yourself before you go along saying that God is metaphysics.
The branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowledge, substance, cause, identity, time, and space.
Awesome.
It
So
is
none
a
of those things
school
are
of
wrong.
philosophy, not science.
Wait, you just said that metaphysics is a pseudo philosophy?
No, it's the school of philosophy. School.
Okay, okay. Well, it's clearly not God, so I'm glad we kind of corrected that because
No,
that was
metaphysics is just
crazy.
kind of wrapped up in God.
No, it literally isn't, and you just read that, and none of those words were God. So I don't know what to tell you, but sure. Um. Anyways, yeah, no, like things like metaphysics, no. But when we start talking about like the foundations of science, when you say that it's brick by brick solidified, I don't believe this to be true. Like
I
there
think
like
that's
when you
because you have
say
a fundamental misunderstanding of the scientific method.
no, I think I understand it quite well. The scientific method can't warrant the scientific method. Like that's not
It
that's
can.
it can't because the basis of all of your science and the scientific method is based on some form of empiricism. Like and
Yes,
that has its yes, and that has its roots in
science deals with what
perceptivism.
is. If it
No,
exists, the scientific method can observe it.
it deals with what is as an assumption of what you can observe. Like that like you cannot prove what is. You assume that what is what you can observe and that's what you test. Like you test the observable world and you assume that that is reality and that is the fundamental principle of science that you
Because you
have to
can't
hold
measure or
because
observe anything you can't observe. We don't know what's beyond observation. Literally
well,
anything could be
I'm not. Wait,
beyond
I'm not.
observation.
I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna make claims that say you can't. I'm not. I'm not willing to say. I'm saying we don't know. That would be a more appropriate. I'm not going to say that it's impossible to measure things we can't observe. There are things that I think in a metaphysical
If we
sense there
can
are some
measure it,
things that
then by
people can.
definition we have observed it.
I
That's
wouldn't
what
go so.
measuring means. You have to observe something in order to
No,
measure it.
that's not necessarily true. I disagree. I disagree. I don't think measuring requires observation. That's not necessarily true.
Okay, for the sake of the audience and my own brain cells, I'm going to go over quickly the scientific method. It is observation and question, number one, then researching the topic, then forming a hypothesis, which is an idea you can test, testing with an experiment, analyzing the data, and reporting conclusions so that that whole process can be repeated once again by your peers.
Uh huh.
That is the scientific method. It is the
That's fine.
single most reliable method we have for telling us what is in the universe.
That's you can believe this, but I don't think you can warrant that. But we'll put it like this. Well, I don't know what that was really about, but that didn't really answer most of my questions. I'm saying that the basis of the scientific method is the assumption that what is observable is, and that you can make conclusions off of that. I don't necessarily find this to be true.
Do
So
you think
when
we
you
can't
say
observe and make conclusions off of what we observe?
I don't think that it's concrete. The assumption that what you see is like, and I don't believe that you understand the word measure. I think that you can measure things. I will not go so far as to say that you cannot measure things that you can't observe. I think that there are plenty of concepts that are unobservable, but
Name something
are
that is unobservable that we can also measure.
we can go with numbers.
Numbers are
I
measured. Are you retarded?
Well, not that very progressive. Not that they're measured, but they're not observable. Hand me a number. Like, hand me the concept of a number. Like, where is the concept of numbers come from? Like, numbers are mind dependent. Like, they're completely a priori. Like, you don't find numbers outside. Like, concepts are measurable. Like, identity is measurable. Arithmetic is an a priori to most extents,
And
right?
we
Like,
can still observe numbers.
well, no, you can't really observe numbers. People translate the concept of a number into a physical form. Like that is a lot separate than the concept of numbers being a tangible, observable thing. Like the number
My
one
guy,
is a
numbers are also in science. Crazy thing to
that's
know. But numbers are
that's
quite
that
prominent in science.
that's not that doesn't what does that even mean? Yeah, I don't disagree with this claim. I'm saying that they're a priori. Like you can't like they're not like they're ontologically not existent things. Like no one hands people numbers. You hand things to people that you can count. Like they're conceptual. Like it's like it's an absistent ontological thing. Like I believe that's what it is. I believe it's absistent, but it might be no, yeah, I believe it's an absistent. Like, I'm trying to think of Meinong's ontology, but like, yeah, in an ontological sense, it's an absistent concept, right? Like there's no such thing as a concept of numbers. Like numbers, like the idea of numbers is not something you can hand people. Like even if I hand you a dozen eggs, like the concept of numbers has to independently exist, like from that for you to be able to count them, or
Okay,
you wouldn't be
numbers
able to. So
exist.
like
That still doesn't explain your
well,
claim.
yes, it does. Numbers exist, but not in a not on a perceptual level, like or not on an observable level. Like you can't hold a number. There's no sense that you can use. It's completely a priori. It's mind dependent. So I would now. I'm open to rebuttals of this. I'm not too sure of very many, and I'm sure there's someone who has an interesting rebuttal that might or may not be true. But like I said, that's why I'm not going to make a claim. Like when you said, well, you can't measure anything that isn't observable. I didn't say, yeah, you can or no, you can't. I'm going to go with the claim. I'm not entirely sure if that's true. I'm going to lean towards no, that's not true, because there are like absistent concepts that are completely a priori that people use day to day that people can measure. Like the concept of one and two are like completely mind dependent. Like it's not an observable phenomenon what one and two is. So like yes,
Since
I
we
do
know
think that
that
there's
both, since we know that there are four prime numbers less than 8, we know that there are numbers. In short, this short argument is correct, but it is not an ontological claim or part of the philosophy of mathematics. Both realists and nominalists reject the short argument and adopt the idea that the existence of numbers might be posited to explain known mathematical truths. Philosophers operate with negative concepts of what numbers are. They are not in space and time, nor related causally to us, not perceivable, etc. The preliminary outlook does not actually characterize a kind of existing thing at all. It creates the atmosphere of weirdness, characteristics of both fictionalism and Platonicism. Positing things for the sake of explanation makes sense for empirical context, but the ineligibility of positing cannot survive the move to philosophy of mathematics. Moral realism is a model for unsatisfactory thinking that generates ontological commitment in mathematics.
Okay, I don't know why you felt the need to read all that, but yes, it pretty much came to a quite. I mean, the parts of it that actually mattered in what we were saying. Yes, they're not necessarily perceivable things that you can observe, and it is because of that that they're somewhat mind dependent in a sense, and it is because of that that some people may agree or disagree that you can come to conclusions. You have people like Descartes and Pascal that kind of use the idea or concept of numbers as a foundation for a priori thought. And then you have people that disagree with this, like that's basically what it said. The last part I just kind of ignored because I don't really care what moral realists think. Like, I mean, that's cool, but that doesn't really relate to me in any way. I'm not making any moral claims. Um, so yeah, yeah. So basically, they're ontologically non-existent things. They're absistent. They're concepts, and they're not observable or perceivable, but they're measurable. But like I said, maybe there's a rebuttal to that. I'm not entirely opposed to it, but like I think it's better that we continue. Like with this being said, I think we can both agree that making the claim that nothing is measurable unless it is observable is at the very least controversial, at most not true, right? So we're gonna take this back to the original conversation, which is that I mean we've been on this rabbit hole for so long I kind of forgot where we were going at, but
The difference
pseudoscience
between
can,
science and pseudoscience, and I've explained the definitions of both, and you seem to think that the science, which is the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural world, following a systemic methodology based on evidence, is separate from the scientific method, the process of objectively establishing facts through testing and
I mean, of
experimentation.
course, yes. Science is 100%. The issue is science is now synonymous with the method that we come to conclusions. I'm simply saying that science is not synonymous with the scientific method. Absolutely, right? Like it is.
Science
It
is
is
the pursuit of knowledge. The method is the
correct.
application, or the process of establishing the facts through testing and experimentation.
Well, if you believe the method is a scientific method, then yes, like that is true. So you've followed along with that. So good. I'm glad we can both agree on that. So yes, so they are separate in that sense. But I don't necessarily believe that pseudoscience is incapable of coming to conclusions. When we use the alchemy example, where an individual drinks something and the claim is that they die, both can come to a factual conclusion about something with totally separate methods. Like it is not necessarily true that it has to be, let's say, peer reviewed, or maybe it's not even observable. There could be exceptions to this. The idea that we've somehow come across the perfect means of acquiring knowledge, I find is quite absurd. I mean, the scientific method has been around for only so many hundred years, right? Probably 200, perhaps. Maybe there's earlier kind of ideas of it, but like
It
what
came
we
about
consider
during
to
the
be
Enlightenment period, so about
yeah,
400-ish years.
yeah, well, 1600s, yeah, maybe perhaps. I think maybe the ideas of it, yeah. So this came around. I find it just a little bit absurd to believe that we've come to this like absolute conclusion that is the effective method of coming to this. I don't believe that to be true. I think that because other methods are capable of coming to conclusions just as effectively or more effectively than the scientific method in select fields, that defining things as pseudoscience and discrediting their capability to come
Okay,
to
let's
conclusions
dig into
is.
this because
Oh, I remember. I
let's
remember.
say
Not to
someone's
interrupt. I
selling
remember
like
what we were talking.
fucking
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
essential
Go ahead.
oils or healing crystals, goes to a sick person and they wave their healing crystals over that sick person. Just because the sick person happens to get better does not mean that the healing crystals did jack diddly shit to heal that person. Whereas a
But that's not
doctor
true.
can employ methods that are proven to be reliable and known to work. And when the doctor says, hey, we're going to give you some medicine, here's the effects, here's the side effects, here's everything we know about it, written on the side of the bottle or in a paper that you sign before taking it.
Uh huh.
We know that the doctor can be relied upon to make accurate
Well,
assessments, whereas the person with healing
you know this.
crystals is
You know this in a
making it up on the spot.
well, well, not thinking of it on the spot. That there's some amount of science to it. Like that, I'm sure if you asked anyone who, I'm sure if you asked a practitioner of Eastern medicines, that they wouldn't believe that they're just making it up on the spot, right? Like there's like actual mapping of these points. Like chi is something that is not just thought up on the spot. Like when they select these points for chi, they're not just making stuff up, right? But I'm not going to take a position on Eastern medicine. I don't believe my argument's dependent on making this position. But I'm just simply saying that the reason you believe that you can come to these conclusions better is because you have an exclusionary view of science, where you've basically separated the ideas of science and pseudoscience. Now you might be true in the
Because
sense
they
that.
are definitionally two different things. That's why we have two separate
Well,
words for
no, but,
them.
but no, no, we were. I already addressed this in the first half of the very first sentence of the discussion. Yes, the words science and pseudoscience are definitionally separate things. Their categories do exist so long as you define them as two different things. But what you establish or put in each category has to be warranted in some sense. Like pseudoscience is not just pseudoscience because you call it pseudoscience, right? Like pseudoscience is a category for sciences that you believe are unreliable or inefficient methods for coming to conclusion. Then we assess methods that we
Because they
come to
have not
knowledge
stood up to rigor and scrutiny.
from. What, the same method that you can't warrant either?
You can warrant science. That's how it's so reliable. We've got
You
hundreds
you
of
you
years of doing
well,
this.
you can warrant. Let's be very clear. You think you can warrant the scientific method?
Yes!
How can you do so?
The scientific method is the single most reliable way of attaining information that we
How,
know of.
how can you warrant this?
There is no flaw in the scientific method.
Really, I think that there's quite a couple flaws.
Where is the flaw in observation, research, hypothesis,
You
test,
don't need to read every
analyze,
single one.
report?
Like, well, I mean, issues of induction have existed forever, but I'm not going to have a topic of induction, because you don't even know you have one, but you have a Popperian view of induction that was basically given to you for the past 400 years that isn't really warrantable in any sense, but that's fine. Um, but
I'm sorry,
on a
given to
secondary
me?
note,
Is science a conspiracy?
well, it was given to you in the sense that it's not like you discovered the scientific method, did you?
No.
And you
I
have,
learned it.
okay, and
Like
you
all of
so
science, you
it
can
was.
learn it. You can study and you can test it for yourself.
No, you don't necessarily learn the scientific method by yourself. Like I think that like the idea of the scientific method was right. Like this is kind of absurd because there's people a lot smarter than you hundreds of years ago who did not come up or think of the scientific method. Like it is very
No,
much something that you're
humanity eventually developed it. There are people smarter than me that didn't have cell phones. We have them now. We've advanced. We've become more intelligent as time has
Well, I
moved
don't, I
on,
don't, I
as our
don't, I don't. Well,
collective
I don't think
knowledge base
I don't
has
think people, I
grown.
don't think people have become more intelligent. But what my claim is basically that it's a doctrine. Like the scientific method is a doctrine by definition.
So
Like
you are
it is.
one of those people who thinks science is a fucking religion. I don't know why you were trying to weasel out of that earlier.
What are you talking about? Of course, it's a doctrine. Like in order for like science being synonymous with the method is a doctrine. Like for me to say that there is a method, an absolute one, to come to conclusions, and I am someone who learns this. It is a doctrine. Like that.
Science
That
has no prophets.
what? Yes, there is absolutely a fucking hierarchy in science. If you don't think scientists are exclusionary, then
No.
you're absurd.
Let me give you an
But Ron,
example. Let me give you an example. Charles
I
Darwin,
do
the father of evolutionary biology. He was wrong about a
evolution.
lot of the stuff that he observed. He came to wrong conclusions and he had wrong ideas. And we know that because we rigorously tested his ideas until we found the faulty ones and science
I don't
moved
I
forward,
don't know
self-updated
what
and
point I
self-corrected.
don't know what point you think you're making, but it isn't mine. Like science is a doctrine by definition because it is attempting to solve the issue. Like what you define as science is attempting to solve an issue of separation between what is the best and illegitimate methods of coming to conclusions. This is a belief system. Like you have to, this is something that you were adopted into. You have not read the literature and you did not come to this conclusion by yourself. And even if you did read the literature, I believe it still fall under doctrine. But yeah, no, it is science is a doctrine by definition. Like at least the
A
method
belief
is
or
like
set of
you
beliefs
must
held or taught by a church, political party, or other group.
say again.
A belief or set of beliefs that are held or taught by the church, political party, or other group. Definitionally,
Yeah,
science
it's the
is
other
not a
group.
doctrine.
Yes, of course it is. It's taught by another group. You were taught through the education system
And
that
yet,
this is true.
at no point does science ask you to believe
I'm not gonna
anything.
argue ridiculous. I'm not gonna argue ridiculous semantics with you. When you say
You
something is
are
more,
the king of semantics. I will
it's not.
I will fight you on semantics all day. You have
It's
been
not.
doing nothing but semantics this entire
Well, no,
discussion.
it's not that. Well, yes, it's not necessarily. I'm not arguing about semantics, but I feel like this point is an absurd one. Like this
Science
is
asks you
an
never to
I
believe
you
anything.
you in order and if there is no objective basis or foundation for science, if you understand that the basis of the scientific method is an assumption that what you perceive is reality, and you go off of this assumption, this is a discipline. Like this has to be a belief in some sense.
No,
Like,
science never asks you to believe anything. It shows you evidence.
oh my God, you have to believe in the observer. Like you say that because you think that science is synonymous with the scientific method. The scientific method requires that you believe your observations to be true. It is dependent on empiricism and perceptualism. That reality is what you perceive and therefore is testable, and that conclusions can be drawn off of this. That is the problem of induction, and the other part of it is the problem of perception. So, yes, there are two fundamental assumptions that the
can't spell.
scientific method requires that you believe. Because if I asked you, hey, could you hypothetically believe that half of the things you see aren't real, and then also believe you can come to conclusions about them using a method that uses observation? The obvious answer is no. If your method requires that you observe something to be true, and you simultaneously hold the belief that certain things aren't what they seem to be, or what you perceive isn't always true, then
Empiricism, the theory that all knowledge is derived from sense experience stimulated by the rise of experimental science, developed in the 17th and 18th century, expounded upon in particular by John Locke and George Berkeley and David Hume.
Sure.
There are things that are outside of our sensory experience that we can still measure with a scientific method.
I know. Well, no, not with the scientific method, but you can measure.
Yeah, or that you
Okay.
can measure using
Yeah.
the scientific method.
Well, not using the scientific method. You can't really use the scientific method to prove numbers exist as a concept. We already went over this. There are things that you can't observe that you can measure, possibly, is what we came to the conclusion on. That's what you disagreed with at first, that I basically said, no, that's actually maybe not true. And now we can agree that it's possible. But besides that point, I am basically saying that there are two things. That is a non-observable thing that the scientific method can't prove to be true, but we understand to be true and we assume to be true, right? Like you do not walk around with the impression that numbers aren't true, but you know for a fact that the scientific method is incapable of proving the existence of numbers, and that is because numbers are not observable concepts. So as someone who thinks numbers exist and someone who preaches for arithmetic, just know that your scientific method isn't capable of proving that. And then simultaneously, the foundation of science is in some form is on a basis of empiricism, and that is on a basis of perceptualism, and that is on the basis that things you observe are reality. And in order for you to believe that this is true, you must make no exceptions to this. Which, how could you possibly know if that's true or not? Like, how can you prove that there is no exception, that what you perceive is always true or false? Like, there could hypothetically be one thing somewhere in the ether out there that we think we perceive correctly, but just isn't.
Yeah, but
right?
that's the beautiful thing about science is that it's humble. Science doesn't arrogantly say that we know all things. Science says here's all the things we have observed and tested.
No, no. This is the deflection. I am simply saying this. So, well, first and foremost, science doesn't say anything. Remember, we had the conversation. Science doesn't make claims. The scientific method.
My God, the scientific method is the sum collection of human knowledge.
No, the scientific method is the method in which we come to conclusions. You've read it like 6 times. We'll put it like this. The scientific method has to make the fundamental assumption that what is observable is true. This has to be assumed 100%. This
Well,
assumption.
no, not quite. You can observe things and they can be not true because you can arrive
No, no,
at
no, but
incorrect conclusions through
you
faulty
wait, pause.
measurements.
That's different. That's different than my claim. You can observe things and have them not be true. That's correct. But in order for science or the scientific method to persist, you must believe or you must assume that what you observe is reality to some extent. Like you are in like what is the basis of the scientific method if you say that what you observe is can on its most basic level not be true? You wouldn't be capable of testing it because you wouldn't be capable of coming to a conclusion about it because you don't believe or you also assume that it could possibly not be true. So that method is fun.
This is
Like
one of the things that's
it's like
so important about the scientific method.
I don't understand why you continue to like deny this critique. I'm not saying that you concede that the critique is true. It's possible that it's not. Like I said, I am not claiming that everything we see isn't real. I am saying that in order for science or the scientific method to perform correctly, you must take the fundamental assumption that everything you perceive is true. I am saying that this is not a verifiable one. It is not a verifiable one by the scientific method. Like if I give something to you, you can run the scientific method a million times. You could never prove that what is in your hand is what you assume it is, right? Like so, like
Wait. Are you talking about the whole idea that like anything that's not like from our brain might be false?
well, I mean that is what a priori versus a posteriori is. Yes, that is what perceptionalism is.
Oh, great. We've
Like,
drifted back into fucking philosophy again. God damn it.
what are you talking about? We've been talking about this the whole time. Like, I don't know why. What this shouldn't stun you. I've said this 4 times. The basis of
Science
all of
is
the science.
resistant to such philosophical annoyances. Science tells us
No,
what
it's
is,
not.
not what
I don't
ought.
care what Neil deGrasse Tyson said. No, it's not. Like you can find issues with the scientific method that aren't just on an observational sense. Like there is things that the
You
scientific
haven't
method.
named them.
I just said the fact that you must assume that sorry, the issue with the scientific method that I've stated multiple times is the assumption that the observable world is what it is and that you can reach conclusions off of that. That is the
Because
problem of
you'd have to
induction.
first prove that the observable world isn't what it is before we were to
No,
believe
that's
otherwise.
not true. No. That's not no. The burden isn't on the person who says possibly things
The
aren't true.
burden
I
is
think
on you who makes the claim. If you claim that the earth is flat, you have to prove that. If you claim
wait,
crystals
there's
can heal you,
no there
you
dude
have to
that
prove that.
not
If you
all
claim that
no
the
dude.
observable universe is
You don't
disconnected from
know.
the
That's
actual
not how
universe, you have to
argumentation no.
prove that first.
That's not how argumentation works. You can't just say that everything in the world is real because people who say it possibly isn't can't prove that. That is a negative assertion. Like you can't
That
come to
is
that
one of the
conclusion.
wonderful things about science. It asks you to fucking prove everything you say. Everything.
But that does not that's what do you okay, pause. Just pause. Just take a breath and like think for a second. You believe it is the burden of proof on the person who questions reality rather than the person who says and assumes that everything they see is perceptually correct 100% of the time.
If
That
someone
is a
makes an extraordinary
no,
claim, they require
that
extraordinary
no, you
evidence.
don't know what no, it's a negative assertion. Like it's like saying God isn't real. Like that is a claim as well. Like you can't necessarily like it's not the burden of whoever says things are like all the time. Like you understand negative assertions are ones that are insane. If you say that everything I perceive is always true, and I ask you, how do you know that? You can't just
No, I've already
respond with
talked about this. You can have things that you observe that aren't true. People perceive ghosts, and
no,
yet they're actually
pause,
just
pause,
night terrors or
pause.
vibrations in the fucking ocular nerve in their eyeballs. This is the
Okay.
whole basis of like magic shows. Magic doesn't actually exist, but through trickery and illusion and through messing with the perceptions of people, you can do amazing things. Just
You
because you observe
assume
something doesn't make it
this is the
true.
pause. If you can accept the idea that your perception can be intentfully or willfully deceived, then why can you not concede that your perception can be unwillfully or unintentionally deceived as well? If we can agree that this is possibly true and that this can be on a fundamental level, like what there is possibly a singular object somewhere on the earth That is not what we assume it is, and there is no way to perceive it otherwise,
And there's
right?
no way to perceive it otherwise. If there is no way to perceive something outside of perception, then we have to move forward with what we can perceive. We only
Well,
have the
you
instruments
can,
we have available.
yeah, yeah, that's fine. So you basically have to go, okay, well, that thing, we're just not going to fuck with that thing, but the rest of
No, we're
everything, we're
going
going
to
to.
absolutely fuck with that thing until we figure out what it is, until we find a
Yeah, but
way to perceive
there's
it.
it's it's literally you even said it yourself. There are things that are not perceivable,
Which is
like
why we
if
build instruments and methods that account for the
it
faultiness of human perception.
those are all based on observation. Like you a microscope is no different. It's not, microscopes aren't don't have a different basis of observation. Like the fundamental assumption of a microscope is the same as using a telescope. Like you must fundamentally believe that what you're seeing is the reality that it is. It is possible that the thing that you were holding in your hand is not an egg, but instead an apple, but that there is no perceivable way to know. Even if you taste it, eat it, put it in your ass, or look at it through a microscope, there's no way to perceive it otherwise. Now, you may say, well, we can just move on. This thing is
Okay,
absurd. And
but
like,
this is an absurd argument. You're saying because there might be the almost zero possibility that there might be
how do you know
something
it's zero
that is
Wait,
completely
how do you know
beyond
it's zero?
all tools of
What,
perception, that we
Todd,
must
what
somehow
makes it?
disregard the
No.
validity of the scientific method because something might exist that we can we can magically not observe. That is a stupid argument.
How,
Make your closing
what?
arguments. We're
This
almost
is,
out of time.
well, that was quite the NPC rant. I don't think anything stupid about that at all. I think that your anger quite clearly shows that you find the issue with what you're saying. I don't think that you can put you say that there's a almost 0% chance. I don't know where you come up with these numbers where you can possibly measure how much of things you really perceive in reality. There's no way to tell that because you can't necessarily
This is
perceive
just the
anything.
God
I
argument wrapped up in a different set of clothing.
I thought this was my conclusion. Um, Okay, well, is this my conclusion, or are you still going?
Make your closing arguments, and then I'm gonna
Okay,
close it
okay,
down.
well then I'll finish. Because you can't verify anything to necessarily be perceivable in reality. I don't know how you put numbers on it, but further than that, I don't think it's a stupid argument to say, and it's not. Like, this is like the fundamental assumption of observable and perceptualism. Like you must come to the conclusion that everything you observe is grounded in reality. And if you seriously believe that us, the man apes who basically came out of a pond, as you believe, not what I believe, but you believe the monkeys can somehow perceive reality truly for what it is out of our eyes that can barely read for some people, then I think that's quite ignorant. But yeah, I don't believe that there's a separation in pseudoscience and science. That's a legitimate one. I think all of them are meticulous and semantical. That are used to basically discredit some things and form new hierarchies. I don't think the demarcation problem exists. I think the scientific method is just the method at which we attain knowledge, and I don't think the scientific method should be labeled as a better science than pseudosciences as you define them, which aren't really pseudosciences. Yeah, I just don't think the basis is true. And on top of that, lastly, I would just fundamentally say that on a conversation of theism, I don't believe there's any way to use observable science to disprove or prove the existence of God. Maybe fundamental claims that religions make, but even then, I believe all of them can be tampered with in some non-observable way. So I don't think you can really come to these conclusions. But yeah, that's my closing argument.
Okay.
All right, adios.
All right. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Holy. Ah. Okay. That ending point. He's just making the God argument in a different set of clothes. He's just disguising the God argument. What if God exists and you can't perceive him? How do you say that that God isn't real? Your science must be faulty because something must be magically, divinely outside of all perception because it's convenient to his argument. That is a stupid argument. Ugh. I can't believe he's like, oh, I'm not going to get into an argument of semantics. The whole thing, back to front, was a semantic argument over the difference between science and pseudoscience. Even though I had up on screen the entire time the differences between science, the scientific method, and pseudoscience. I started this whole thing off by explaining that pseudoscience is pretending to be science but lacks the rigor essential to the scientific method. And then many times I hit on how rigorous and self-correcting and observational that the scientific method is. He said that science is a doctrine, and then I go and find the definition of doctrine as a set of beliefs. And I point out that science doesn't ask you to believe anything. It presents you with evidence that lead to conclusions. Like how we can measure gravity by measuring how fast things fall. A bowling ball or an apple, and we can drop them at the same height, same down, measure that they fall at the same rate. Or how, Then he makes the argument that because something might exist outside the realm of all perception, that an apple might somehow magically be disguised as a cantaloupe, that we can't then ensure the rigidity of the scientific method. It is wild. I really liked my the math explanation there. If you have a student guessing random numbers, occasionally they might hit on something right. A pseudoscientist might occasionally say something right through sheer happenstance. They are randomly spitting out, and they might accidentally hit something, all right? Monkeys on a typewriter will eventually type out Shakespeare. That does not mean that they came up with Shakespeare. The scientific method is so important because it is the process of establishing objective facts through testing and experimentation. Observation, research, hypothesis, test, analyze, and report conclusions so that other people can observe and question your methodology, research the area, form their own hypotheses, and test your own experiments. If you want to, by the way, science doesn't ask you to believe anything. If you don't believe the theory of gravity, go test it yourself. You will find that their methodologies have been proven 1,000 times over. You don't believe in the theory of evolution, as you saw in his snide little comment about how, I believe people came from a pond and monkeys. If you don't believe in the theory of evolution, you can test it. It's been done. Look up, what is it called? The black fly experiment, or look up ring species. Or look up how viruses evolve very quickly. And my goodness. It's such a frustrating debate to, let's see, I wrote down a little thing. Yeah. How do you get to 4? And I say, well, 2 plus 2 equals 4. He says, no, that doesn't make sense. And he starts a semantic argument about it. I'm like, okay, let's break it down. We'll use a simpler example, like 1 plus 1 equals 2. We can get the basic principles of math, and that'll help us understand 2 plus 2. And that's how we get to 4. And then he's like, no, I don't believe in math. He'll say some crazy shit like that every single time. Insufferable conversation. Anyways, if you'd like to see more debates, follow for more. If you'd like to actually debate me yourself, join the Discord. It's linked in the description. And if you want to support me monetarily for doing these for free, you can join my Patreon. And with that, I'm gonna call it a day. Oh my goodness. I need a long drink.